The girl who survived. They said the dragon Ashran had not let a living soul touch her scales in 300 years. Kings had tried. Priests had tried, with their oils and their prayers and their gold-threaded gloves. One general, drunk on wine and pride, had reached out a bare hand and lost the whole arm for it. The beast slept curled around the highest spire of Emberreach Keep, like a mountain of black iron and banked coal. And the only living thing she had ever allowed close was Kaelin Valor, the Alpha King, her bonded rider, the man the war had carved out of a boy. This is not that king's story, though he is in it, bleeding through every page like a wound that never quite closes. This is the story of a girl nobody wanted, a girl sold twice before her 12th winter, beaten into silence, taught that her only worth was in how little space she took up in a room. A girl the court called Omega Filth, behind gloved hands and painted smiles. A girl who learned to read the exact moment before a hand became a fist so she could flinch a half-second early and save herself the worst of the blow. A girl named Wren. They did not know, none of them knew, that 17 years before she ever set foot in that palace, an entire bloodline had been hunted to extinction in a single burning night, so that a girl exactly like her would never be born. They failed. And on the night Wren touched the dragon, no one was allowed to touch. The whole kingdom finally understood why. Before we begin, if you love dark lichen kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for epic Lichen King romances, where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. The king who loved no one Emberreach had been at war for 11 years. 11 years of the Ashen Wastes bleeding raiders across the northern border, like a wound that would not scab over. 11 years of King Kaelin Valor riding out at the first frost and returning, if he returned at all before spring, thinner, harder, quieter than the year before. He was 26 years old and already a legend carved in the wrong material. Not marble, but scar tissue. The court called him the Alpha King, and they meant it as more than a title. There was something in him that had stopped being fully human somewhere around his 4th campaign. Something that watched a room the way a wolf watches a herd, counting exits, counting threats, never once counting friends. He had buried his father, his 2 older brothers, and the only woman he had ever let close enough to almost love, all before his 22nd birthday. After that, he had simply stopped letting anyone close at all, except Ashran. The dragon had come to him the night his father died. Unbonded, ancient beyond record, her scales the color of a sky choosing between midnight and a bruise. She should have chosen no one. Dragons like her did not bond twice in a lifetime, and legend said she had already lost one rider centuries before Kaelin was born, lost them so violently that she had sworn, in whatever language dragons swear things, never again. And yet she had lowered her enormous head to a grieving 19-year-old boy, standing alone in a burned throne room, and let him press his forehead to her snout, and something old and furious in her had simply decided. From that night on, Ashran allowed no other hand near her, not the king's generals, not his physicians when she was wounded, not even the Omega handlers whose entire bloodline had once, generations ago, tended dragons for a living. She would rather burn a wing to the bone than let a stranger touch it. It made her useless for anything but war, and perfect for nothing but him. Some nights, watching her sleep coiled around the spire, Kaelin wondered if that was the whole of his life now. One loyal, furious, unreachable thing, loving him the only way either of them still knew how. Through violence, through survival, never through softness. He told himself he did not miss softness. He was of course lying, and had been lying to himself about it for so long that the lie had stopped feeling like one. His generals whispered that he would die on some frozen border with no heir and no wife, and nothing to show for a kingdom saved but a throne room no warmer than the battlefield he'd spent his whole life in. He let them whisper. It was easier than telling them they were right. The slave they didn't want. 300 miles south, in a slave market that smelled of rot and cheap perfume, a girl named Wren stood in the last row, because the last row was where they put the ones nobody wanted to look at twice. She was 19. She looked older. in the way that surviving things ages a person faster than years do. A thin scar ran from her left ear to her collarbone, a gift from her second owner, the one who had discovered, too late for her but not for him, that an Omega with nothing left to lose does not always stay obedient. Omega, the auctioneer had written on the slate beside her, in the same flat hand he'd used for livestock. Omegas fetched low prices in the capital these days. Too much politics, too much whispering about the old blood purges, too much risk that owning one might mean owning trouble. Most buyers wanted alphas for the arena or betas for the fields. Ren had learned, a long time ago, not to hope for a kind buyer. Hope was a luxury that got beaten out of her at 9 years old. The same year raiders burned her village to cinders and took everything, everyone she had ever loved. She remembered almost nothing of that night whole, the way you never remember the worst night of your life in order, only in pieces, sharp enough to cut. A smell of smoke that still made her hands shake if a hearth fire was lit too close. Her mother's voice saying one word, over and over, that Ren had never understood. A name, maybe, or a warning, said with the particular desperation of someone who knows they are running out of time to say it. And then hands, strangers' hands, dragging her away from the flames while something huge and dark screamed in the sky above the trees, a sound so enormous it had rearranged something permanent in her small chest. She had never told anyone about the huge dark thing in the sky. Nobody would have believed a 9-year-old orphan claiming she'd seen a dragon the night her whole world ended. Dragons belonged to kings. They did not haunt burning villages that history had already forgotten, and orphans who claimed otherwise were, at best, pitied, and at worst, sold to owners who found the madness amusing. So she had buried it, the way she buried everything, deep, silent, useful only as a scar to press on when she needed to remember she'd survived worse than whatever was happening today. It had gotten her through 2 owners, a beating that nearly took her eye, and 11 years of being told, in 100 small daily ways, that she took up too much room simply by continuing to breathe. Today, a steward in palace livery was walking the rows with a bored expression and a very short list. "Kitchens need bodies," he told the auctioneer, not troubling to lower his voice, as if the girls standing there were furniture that happened to have ears. "Cheap ones, the king doesn't care what they look like as long as they can carry water and don't faint at the sight of blood." Ren almost laughed. Faint at the sight of blood. She had not fainted at the sight of blood since she was 9 years old. She was sold within the hour for less than the price of the auctioneer's boots, and marched north with 4 other girls, a rope loose around each of their wrists, more for the steward's comfort than because any of them had the strength left to run. It should have felt like the worst day of her life. It was, in fact, the first day of the only life that would ever actually belong to her, a keep of stone and quiet cruelty. Emberreach Keep was larger than any building Ren had ever seen, and colder, despite the roaring kitchen hearths that never went out. She learned its rhythms the way she'd learned every household she'd ever been sold into. Fast, silent, and from the bottom up. The head cook, a broad woman named Marta, with flour permanently ground into the creases of her knuckles, was not cruel exactly, only exhausted past the point of noticing new faces as anything but new pairs of hands. Water from the east well, not the west. The west's gone brackish. Don't speak unless a noble speaks to you first, and pray to whatever god you've got left, that none of them do. And whatever you hear at night from the spire. Marta had crossed herself without finishing the sentence, the way half the staff did, as though naming the dragon aloud might summon her attention. The other kitchen girls were not unkind, only careful, the way people who have learned that kindness costs something learn to ration it. Ren did not mind. She had never needed much kindness to function, only enough silence to disappear into. And Emberreach Keep, for all its cold stone grandeur, gave her plenty of silence to work with. What it did not give her was safety from the small, constant cruelties of a court that had decided, generations ago, that Omegas existed to be looked past. A steward's boot, accidentally catching her ankle on the stairs. A noblewoman's maid sneering the word filth under her breath while handing back a tray, as though Ren's hands might carry something contagious. A guard who let his eyes linger too long and then laughed, quietly, when she flinched away from the wall he'd cornered her against. Until Marta, of all people, appeared with a rolling pin and a look that sent him retreating without a word. "They forget," Marta muttered afterward, not quite meeting Ren's eyes, "that we're the ones who feed them." It was the closest thing to tenderness anyone in that keep had offered her in a decade, and Ren carried it home to her narrow cot, like a coal held carefully against the cold. It was 3 weeks into this new, careful life, hauling a bucket of wash water up the wrong servant's stair in the dark because she'd gotten turned around and was too afraid of a beating to ask for directions, that she found herself standing, quite by accident, at the base of the spire. The touch the court never forgot. The kitchens of Emberreach Keep sat at the base of the eastern tower, close enough to the dragon's spire that on quiet nights, the whole stone floor hummed faintly with her breathing. The other kitchen slaves crossed themselves when the humming got loud. They told Ren, on her very first night, exactly one rule that mattered more than any other. Never go near the spire stair. Not for firewood, not for water, not if the head cook herself ordered it. 3 servants had died trying in the last decade, not from the dragon's fire, but from the guards, who had standing orders to kill anyone who got within 20 feet of that stair before they let the beast decide their fate for them. "She burned a general's arm off," the girl beside her whispered, delighted and terrified in equal measure. "Doesn't let anyone touch her, not since before the king was even born, they say. Not one living soul but him." Ren nodded and said nothing, because saying nothing was the safest thing an Omega slave could ever do. But standing at the base of that spire now, lost and shaking, and certain a beating waited for her either way, Ren felt something she had not felt in 10 years, of careful, deliberate numbness. She felt pulled. The dragon was awake. Ashran's eye, enormous, molten gold, older than the keep itself, opened in the darkness and fixed on the small, exhausted, filthy girl who had wandered, entirely without permission, into the one place in the kingdom no one was allowed to be. Ren should have run. Every instinct 9 years of survival had ever taught her screamed at her to run. She didn't. She looked into that ancient eye, and something in her chest, something she had buried so deep and for so long she'd forgotten it had a name, rose up and answered. "I know you," Ren whispered, and had no idea why she said it, or how it could possibly be true. "I know you." The dragon that had not allowed a stranger's hand within reach in 300 years lowered her enormous head, slow as a falling mountain, until her scaled snout rested, impossibly gentle, in the dirt at Ren's bare feet. And then, in front of 2 guards who had come running at the sound of movement and would spend the rest of their lives insisting no one would ever believe them, Ashran bowed. Ren reached out with a hand that had been struck more times than she could count, and pressed her palm flat against scales the color of midnight, choosing to become a bruise, and the dragon made a sound low in her enormous chest that no living person had heard her make since the night a grieving boy had pressed his forehead to her snout and refused to let go. It was the sound of something ancient, finally coming home. The king's fury, the king's fascination. Kalen Valor was 3 floors below, reviewing supply lines for the spring campaign, when a guard burst into his war room so pale he looked already dead. "Your Grace, the dragon, there's a slave, a kitchen girl, Your Grace, she's touching her." He was up the spire stairs before the sentence finished, sword already drawn, 11 years of war reflex moving faster than thought. He had buried enough people he loved. He was not going to add his dragon's murderer to that list. Not tonight. Not to some careless slave who'd wandered somewhere she had no right to be. What he found at the top of the stair stopped him so completely that the sword nearly fell from his hand. Ashran was curled around a girl in a threadbare kitchen dress, the way she used to curl around him after his worst nightmares, back when he was young enough to still have nightmares he'd admit to. The girl's palm was pressed flat against the dragon's throat, exactly over the place where her pulse beat slowest and deepest, the place Kalen himself had only ever dared touch after a decade of trust. The girl looked up at him with eyes that held no fear of the king standing over her with a drawn blade, only a wary, bone-deep exhaustion that he recognized instantly, because he saw it in the mirror every single morning. "I didn't mean to trespass," she said, voice steady even though her hands, he noticed, were shaking. "I got lost. I'll go." Ashran made a low sound that was Unmistakably, a warning. And it was not aimed at the girl. It was aimed at him. In 26 years, the dragon had never once made that sound in his direction. Kalen lowered the sword very, very slowly, watching his oldest friend in the world curl protectively around a slave girl who smelled of dishwater and wood smoke, and something underneath both of those things that made every hunting instinct in him go suddenly, dangerously quiet. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Ren, Your Grace." "Ren." He said it like he was testing whether the word would burn him. "Get up, slowly, she won't hurt you." A pause, and something almost like wonder, cracking through 11 years of careful nothing. She's never let anyone else close enough to find out. He did not send her back to the kitchens that night. He told himself it was only because the dragon wouldn't allow it. Ashrin had wrapped a wing, gently, over the exhausted girl, and made it very clear that removing her by force would not go well for anyone who tried. He told himself a great many things that spring. Most of them were lies. The court's contempt, the king's protection word, travels through a palace faster than fire through dry grass, and by morning every servant, guard and noble in Emberreach Keep knew that the Omega slave from the kitchens had touched the king's dragon and lived. Not everyone was pleased. "An Omega," Duke Renner sneered at the morning council, loud enough for Ren to hear from her place by the door, where she had been summoned to stand and be stared at like an exhibit. "Filthy blood, unfit for a scullery, and now she's playing at dragon charmer. It's a trick, Your Grace, or worse, witchcraft." The old blood purges happened for a reason. Ren kept her eyes on the floor, the way she always had, the way that had kept her alive through every owner and every cruelty since she was 9 years old. She had learned that surviving contempt meant becoming very good at disappearing while still standing in the room. Even now, crowned in nothing but a servant's dress and the memory of scales beneath her palm, she counted the exits without meaning to. Old habits did not care that something had changed. What she had not learned, because no one had ever given her the chance to learn it, was what it felt like to have someone else refuse to let her disappear. "The old blood purges," Kalen said, in a tone that made 3 council members find something urgent to study on the table in front of them, killed an entire bloodline of dragonkin over a rumor and a king's paranoia. "I have read the histories, Duke Renner." "Have you?" He did not wait for an answer. "This girl bowed a dragon that has burned better men than either of us for less than a raised voice. From this day, she answers to no one in this keep but me. Any hand raised against her, I will consider raised against Ashrin. I trust you all understand what that means." No one asked him to clarify. They had all, at some point, seen what happened to enemies of the crown who forgot exactly how much fire slept above their heads. Duke Renner said nothing further at council. But he watched Ren leave the room with an expression she recognized instantly, because she had seen it before, on the faces of men who had decided a problem needed to be handled quietly, later, where a king's protection couldn't reach. Ren did not thank Kalen for the council chamber. She did not know how. Gratitude was another thing that had been beaten out of her young, replaced with the constant, exhausting arithmetic of what a kindness might cost her later. But that night, for the first time in 10 years, she slept without listening for footsteps. What the fire remembered over the following weeks, something began between the Alpha King and the slave he refused to send away. Something neither of them had a name for because neither of them had ever been permitted to want anything gently before. He found her, most evenings, at the base of the spire, and instead of sending her off, he sat down beside her in the dirt like a man who had forgotten kings weren't supposed to do that. He taught her, without either of them quite deciding to make it lessons, the old care rituals for dragon scale and dragon claw, which oils soothed a burn, which pressure points along Ashrin's jaw meant she was merely resting and not merely tolerating company. Ren, who had spent a decade being taught only how to make herself small, found she was hungry for it in a way that embarrassed her, hungry to be taught something instead of simply punished for not already knowing it. "She hasn't let anyone else close since before I was born," he told her one night, watching Ashrin's great chest rise and fall in sleep. "Not my father, not the Queen Mother, when she was alive. I used to think it meant Ashrin only had room in her for one broken thing at a time. Maybe she doesn't see us as separate broken things, Ren said quietly, surprising herself with the honesty. She had not spoken this freely to another living person in a decade. Maybe she recognizes the same wound in both of us and decided it was easier to guard it twice. Kaylin looked at her for a long moment, and for once, the wariness that lived permanently behind his eyes softened into something dangerously close to tenderness. Who hurt you, Ren? And because it was dark, and because the only witness was a dragon who had already seen the truth of her before either of them had said a word, Ren told him. The night the world burned, she told him about the village at the edge of the eastern hills, so small it did not appear on any of the king's maps, a place of 6 families and a single well, and a mother who used to braid Ren's hair by firelight while humming a tune with no name. She told him it started with the smell. Smoke, but wrong somehow, too fast, too total, the kind of fire that doesn't start by accident. She told him she had been asleep when her mother's hands wrenched her out of bed, half-dressed, barefoot on floorboards already hot enough to sting. My father was already gone by the time she got me outside, Ren said, and her voice had gone very flat, the particular flatness of someone reciting a wound rather than reliving it, because reliving it had never once been survivable. I didn't understand that until years later. I thought he was still inside, fighting whoever had come. He wasn't fighting anyone. He was already dead in the doorway, and my mother stepped over him and did not let herself scream, because screaming would have gotten me killed too. Kaylin did not interrupt. He had learned, in 11 years of watching men die, that grief did not want comfort in the middle of the telling. It wanted witness. There were riders, Ren continued, not raiders. I know the difference now. I didn't then. Organized, disciplined. They weren't there for grain or livestock. They went house to house asking names, checking children's eyes for something. I didn't understand what. My mother pulled me into the trees and told me to run and not look back. And I didn't look back. Not once. Not even when I heard her stop screaming, because some cowardly animal part of me understood that the silence meant she couldn't scream anymore, and that if I turned around, I would see why. A long pause. The fire in the hearth beside them cracked and settled. The last thing she said to me, Ren whispered, over and over, pushing me toward the trees, was that word, Ashrin. I always thought it was my name, or hers, or some prayer I never learned properly. I never understood it. I never let myself try, because trying to understand it meant going back to that night, and I could not afford to go back to that night. Not once, not ever. And the sky, Kaylin said quietly. You said something screamed in the sky. Something huge, something dark. I thought. For years I told myself I imagined it, because a 9-year-old telling people she saw a dragon over a village massacre invites exactly the kind of attention that gets an orphan sold to worse owners than the ones who'd merely beat her. So, I stopped saying it. I stopped even letting myself remember it clearly. Until Ashrin. Kaylin went very still. What was the word? He asked again, though he already knew, and something in his voice had gone taut as a bowstring. Say it again, exactly as you remember it. Ashrin, Ren said, uncertain, watching his face change in the firelight. Why? What is it? Ashrin, asleep against the spire nearby, let out a low rumble that shook dust from the stones, and did not wake. Kaylin did not sleep at all that night, because Ashrin was not a name. It was the old word, in the dead dragon tongue his tutors had forced him to learn as a boy, for dragon blood. For the bloodline of riders and handlers that history recorded as having been wiped out, root and branch, in a single purge nearly 2 decades before. The same purge Duke Renner had so casually praised at council. The same purge that, by every account Kaylin had ever read, had left no survivors at all. He did not tell her that night. He held her instead, in silence, while she cried for the first time in 10 years over a mother who had spent her last living breath trying to give her daughter a name to survive by. And he thought, with a fury that surprised even him, that whoever had ordered that purge was going to answer for it, whatever it cost him to find them. Small mercies. There is a particular kind of happiness that only exists for people who were never supposed to have any, and it is quieter than the happiness other people know, and more easily startled. and Ren spent that spring learning the exact shape of hers. It looked like Kaelin teaching her to sit a saddle without flinching at the height, his hands steady at her waist, his voice low and patient, in a way the rest of the court never heard from him. It looked like the first time she laughed, really laughed, not the careful, controlled sound she'd trained herself to make when laughter was required, and the way he'd gone completely still afterward, staring at her like she'd performed some impossible magic, before admitting, quietly, that he could not remember the last time he'd heard that sound directed at him, and not at some jest made at his expense. It looked like Marta, of all people, slipping her the good bread now, and calling her my lady with a wink, instead of girl, and the strange, unfamiliar warmth of being teased instead of tolerated. It looked like the night Kaelin found her sitting alone at the base of the spire, unable to sleep, and instead of asking what was wrong, simply sat down in the dirt beside her and waited, the way he'd learned to wait with Ashrin, until she was ready to speak, or ready not to, either one equally acceptable to him. "I keep waiting for someone to take this away," Ren admitted eventually, watching Ashrin's great chest rise and fall in sleep. "Every good thing I've ever had got taken. My parents. My name, for a while, my second owner renamed me. Did you know that? Called me Ash. Like even the fire that killed my family was mine to be branded with. I got it back when I was sold again, but I still flinch sometimes when someone calls me that." Kaelin was quiet for a long moment. Then, carefully, like a man diffusing something that might still explode. "Then, I will spend as long as it takes, proving to you that this particular good thing isn't going anywhere. I'm not a patient man in most things, Ren. Ask anyone who's had to sit through one of my council meetings. But I can be patient for this." She did not believe him, not fully, not yet. Belief like that had to be earned in installments, the way trust always did for people who had learned the hard way what happens when you hand it over all at once. But she let herself lean, just slightly, into his shoulder, and he did not move away, and for one unguarded hour, under a dragon's watchful golden eye, neither one of them counted exits at all. What the scholars wouldn't say. In the days after the council chamber, Kaelin did exactly what he'd promised himself he would do, the night Ren told him the truth of her mother's dying word. He sent for the royal archivists, the dusty, careful men and women who kept Emberreach's histories in vaults older than the throne itself, and asked for every record of the blood purge 2 decades gone. He did not expect to find so little. He expected worse. He expected to find nothing at all. "Most of it was burned, Your Grace," the eldest archivist told him, refusing to quite meet his eyes, in the particular way people do when they know more than they are willing to say aloud. "Official record states the purge was ordered by royal decree, your father's seal upon it, in response to a prophecy the temple priests brought before the crown, a prophecy claiming a dragonkin child would one day rise to challenge the throne itself." Kaelin felt something cold settle low in his chest. "My father ordered the massacre of an entire bloodline, over a prophecy. Your father," the archivist said carefully, "signed a decree that was placed in front of him by a council he trusted. I have served 3 kings, Your Grace, and I have learned that decrees signed in grief and haste are rarely decrees a king writes himself." It took another week of quiet digging to find the name attached to the council seat that had first brought the prophecy forward, a seat that, 20 years ago, had belonged to a younger, hungrier version of a man who now sat at Kaelin's own council table, sneering at Omegas and calling them filth. Kaelin said nothing to Duke Renner. He simply watched him more closely, the way Ashrin watched a wounded animal before deciding whether it was worth the fire, and made certain, before he ever rode north to war, that the captain of his guard understood exactly how valuable Ren's life had become, not only to him, but to a truth that someone in that court had already killed a village to bury. The war calls, and so does the past. He meant to tell her everything. He meant to have his scholars comb every burned record of the purge, to find out exactly who had ordered a 9-year-old dragonkin girl's entire world put to the torch, and why. He did not get the chance. The riders came down from the northern pass 3 days later, half dead in their saddles, with word that the Ashen Wastes had finally done what 11 years of skirmishes had only threatened. They had massed for a true invasion, an army large enough to break the border wall by midsummer if it wasn't met and broken first. Kalen Valor had ridden to war 7 times in his life. He had never once, until that morning, dreaded leaving the keep behind. "I have to go," he told Ren, in the war room, with his hands braced on the map table and his back to her, because he could not say it while looking at her face. "Today, now Ashrin flies with me. She always has. I can't leave her behind, and I can't take you into that." "I know," Ren said. She had spent her whole life learning how to survive people leaving. She had never once learned how much it would hurt to want someone to stay. He turned, crossed the room, took her face in both his hands with the same careful, terrified gentleness he might have used on something made of glass and fire both. "I will come back," he said, low and fierce, like a vow sworn on a battlefield rather than a promise made in a war room. "Whatever they told you your whole life about who gets to survive and who doesn't, I am coming back to you, Ren. Believe that, if you believe nothing else I've ever said." He kissed her then, slow and desperate, the kiss of a man who had buried every single person he'd ever loved and refused, this once, to let grief write the ending before the story had even properly begun. Ren kissed him back like she believed him. It was perhaps the first time in 10 years she had let herself believe anything at all. By nightfall, King and Dragon were gone north, and the girl the court still called filth behind gloved hands was left alone in a keep full of people who had been waiting, patiently, for their protector to leave. The blade in the dark Duke Renner did not wait long. He came to her a week after the king's departure, all silk courtesy and poisoned smiles, offering her a kindness, a transfer to a quiet estate in the south, away from a court that clearly didn't want her. He said, as though he were doing her a favor and not arranging her disappearance. Ren had survived enough owners to recognize the shape of a trap dressed as generosity. She refused, politely, and went straight to the captain of the king's own guard, the one man in the keep who had watched Kalen draw his sword to protect her and taken the lesson seriously. It saved her life 3 nights later, when a man with a hired blade came through her window instead of the door, expecting a girl alone and unguarded. He found a girl who had been fighting for her life since she was 9 years old, and a guard captain positioned exactly where the king had quietly ordered him to be. The assassin did not survive to explain who had paid him, but the coin purse left behind, when the captain searched the body, bore Duke Renner's own household seal, a mistake born of arrogance, of a man who had never once imagined an Omega slave's death would be investigated at all. Ren sat in the captain's office afterward, hands still shaking, and for the first time understood something that changed the shape of her fear entirely. They were not afraid of her being weak. They were afraid of what she was. Because if a 19-year-old kitchen slave could bow a dragon that had refused every hand but the king's for 300 years, then the girl was not simply dragon-touched. She was dragon blood. The last of a bloodline someone had gone to enormous, brutal lengths to erase completely, and had failed. Someone in that court had known exactly who she was the moment she bowed that dragon. And someone in that court was terrified of what her survival meant. The captain doubled her guard quietly, without waiting for the king's word, and sent a rider north with the truth of the coin purse and Duke Renner's seal. It would be weeks before that rider found him. Ren spent those weeks learning to sleep with a blade under her pillow, and hating, more than she hated Duke Renner, how familiar that particular kind of vigilance felt. How easily her body slid back into the old shape of always watching the door. Blood and fire on the northern pass. 400 miles north, the war had gone worse than any of Kalen's 7 campaigns before it. The Ashen Wastes had not massed an army. They had massed a slaughter and thrown it at the border wall with a ferocity that spoke of something, or someone, driving them from behind, promising them Ember Reach's fall as payment for their loyalty. Kalen fought at the front line, as he always had, Ashrin a black storm of fire and fury above the battlefield, and for the first time in 11 years of war, he found himself thinking, in the middle of the killing, of a girl's hand pressed flat against his dragon's throat, and how badly he wanted to go home and put his own hand over hers. It was not weakness, this new thing that had crept into him. He told himself that between clashes, wiping blood from a blade that had not stopped moving in 3 days, it was the opposite of weakness. It was the first reason he'd had in 11 years to fight like a man with something left to lose. rather than a man who had already lost everything and simply hadn't stopped moving yet. His men noticed. They fought harder around him, the way soldiers always fight harder around a commander who has, however briefly, remembered what all of this bloodshed is supposed to be protecting. But a battlefield does not care what a man has finally found worth living for. It only cares what he forgets to watch for in the half-second his mind wanders south. It was the thought that nearly killed him. A Wastelander blade found the gap in his armor while his mind was 400 miles south, and Kalen Valor, the Alpha King, the legend, the man who had buried everyone he'd ever loved and survived it, went down in the mud with a wound that even his own physicians, when they finally reached him hours later, would not promise he'd survive. Ashrin screamed. It was a sound no living soldier on that field had ever heard a dragon make. Not fury, not the killing shriek she used before torching an enemy line, but something raw and grief-torn and utterly, devastatingly helpless. Because for the first time in 300 years, there was nothing her fire could fix. And 400 miles south, in a keep gone cold with fear, Ren woke from a sound sleep with her heart hammering and her mother's old word ringing in her ears like a bell struck by lightning. Ashrin, dragon blood does not simply mean the dragon chooses you. It means, the old scholars would have told her, if any had survived long enough to teach it, that the bond runs both directions, that a rider's pain can reach across 400 miles and land, screaming, in the chest of anyone who shares that ancient blood. Ren did not question it. She did not stop to explain herself to the captain, or wait for permission from anyone in that keep who had ever called her filth. She ran to the spire, climbed the stair she had once been forbidden to touch, and found the one dragon left in Emberreach, who was old enough and bonded enough and desperate enough to answer a stranger's call. A younger dragon of the royal guard, half wild, kept in reserve, never once ridden by anyone the king fully trusted. "Take me to him," Ren said, palm flat against ancient scales, voice breaking on every word, and steady underneath the break all the same. "Please, I know you feel it too. Take me to him." The second dragon of Emberreach Keep lowered her head to a slave girl for the second time in a fortnight and bowed. The girl who came back for him. She reached the northern pass at dawn, half frozen, half out of her mind, with a fear she refused to let slow her down, and found a battlefield gone quiet, with the particular silence that follows a war that has, for the moment, exhausted its own capacity for killing. Ashrin was still curled around the king's tent, refusing every physician who tried to approach, snarling at anyone who came near the man bleeding out beneath her wing, until Ren slid off her borrowed dragon's back and walked, unarmed, straight toward the one creature in the world still angry enough to kill her. "Let them help him," Ren said, palm already pressed to Ashrin's scales, voice cracking wide open. "I know you're scared. I am too, but you have to let them help him, or the only thing left of him will be a thing we both have to grieve, and I already know exactly how that feels. I won't do it again, not to you, not to myself." Ashrin went still beneath her hand. Then, slow as something enormous finally choosing to trust, the great dragon lifted her wing and let the physicians through. Kalen was unconscious for 2 days. Ren did not leave his side for any of it, hand wrapped around his the entire time, as though she could hold him to the world through sheer refusal to let go believe. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her face, exhausted and tear-streaked, and more beautiful to him than any victory he had ever ridden home to. "You came," he whispered, voice wrecked with days of fever. "I told you," Ren said, pressing his hand to her chest so he could feel her heart pounding, alive, present, refusing to be anywhere else. "The bond runs both ways. I felt you dying 400 miles away, and I was not going to let that be how our story ended." He laughed, a broken, disbelieving, joyful sound that turned into tears halfway through. The first tears the Alpha King had let anyone witness since he was 19 years old and burying his father. "I love you," he said. Like a man setting down 11 years of armor he hadn't realized he was still wearing. "I loved you before I understood what that word was allowed to cost me. I love you, Ren, dragon blood or kitchen slave or whatever this world decides to call you. I don't care. I only care that you're here. I love you too, Ren said, and for the first time in her entire life, the words did not feel dangerous to say out loud. A crown forged in survival. With the king alive and Ashrin's fury finally aimed forward instead of inward, the battle for the northern pass turned within a fortnight. The ashen wastes broke against a wall they could not burn and a dragon they could not kill, and retreated further than they had in a decade. They found the truth of Duke Renner's treachery in the weeks that followed. A decade-old bargain with the wasteland warlords, struck the very year Ren's village had burned, in exchange for a promise that any surviving dragonkin would be hunted down before they could ever threaten his claim to influence over the crown. He had ordered her parents' deaths not out of cruelty alone, but out of fear. Fear of exactly the girl she had grown up to become. He did not survive his trial by combat against a king who had, at long last, found something worth surviving for. Ren stood at Kaelin's side at the coronation that followed. No longer a kitchen slave, no longer Omega filth spoken of behind gloved hands, but Queen Ren Valor, the last living daughter of the dragonkin, bonded rider in her own right, with a crown of black iron and old gold resting on hair that had once been forbidden to be seen uncovered in that very throne room. 2 dragons curled around the base of the dais instead of one. The court that had once called her filth now bowed low enough to hide their faces, and Ren found, to her own quiet surprise, that she did not need their apology nearly as much as she needed the man beside her, holding her hand like he intended never once to let go. They ruled together for years after that, through harvests and small wars and the slow, patient work of teaching a broken kingdom how to be kinder than it had been to either of them. Ren never fully lost the habit of watching doorways, of counting exits in every new room. Some scars do not heal so much as they become part of the architecture of a person. But she stopped listening for footsteps at night. And every single evening, without fail, the Alpha King who had once sworn to love no one again, sat beside his queen at the base of the spire, in the dirt, exactly as he had the first spring he let himself want something gently, and put his hand over hers, over the scales, over the whole impossible, hard-won shape of a life neither of them had ever been promised. What sleeps beneath the ash, their wedding, was held not in the throne room, but at the base of the spire, in the dirt, because Ren asked for it that way, and Kaelin would have moved the entire keep stone by stone if she'd asked for that instead. Marta cried through the whole ceremony and denied it fiercely afterward. 2 dragons stood witness, instead of a temple's worth of priests, and when the officiant asked if any soul present objected to the union, Ashrin let out a low, warning rumble that silenced Duke Renner's remaining allies more effectively than any decree could have. 7 years later, in a nursery high in Emberreach Keep, a small girl with her mother's watchful eyes and her father's stubborn chin sat cross-legged on the floor, humming a tune no one had ever taught her. Queen Ren stood in the doorway and felt the blood leave her face, because she knew that tune. She had heard it only once before, hummed by her own mother, the night the world burned. "Where did you learn that song, little one?" she asked, voice carefully light, carefully calm, the way she had learned to sound when the true feeling underneath was anything but. The girl looked up with eyes that were, for just one flickering moment, not quite her own, gold instead of gray, ancient instead of young. "The lady in the ash taught me," she said, matter of fact, the way children announce impossible things without understanding why the adults around them go still. "She says there are more of us sleeping. She says the purge didn't work, Mama. She says the ones who ordered it are almost ready to try again." Queen Ren knelt slowly, heart hammering the way it had 400 miles from a dying king, and took her daughter's small hands in both of hers. "Then we'd better be ready first," she said softly, and somewhere far below, in the belly of the ancient spire, 2 dragons who had been sleeping peacefully for 7 years both, at exactly the same moment, opened their eyes. If this story moved you, subscribe for more dark fantasy romance, and stay close, because the ash is not finished burning yet.